Hey guys, thank you so much for joining us for part 4 of our Peacemakers series today. Today, we're finally jumping into the nuts and bolts, the real pieces of the conversations that'll help you to make peace. So thanks for joining us today. And if you want to go ahead and invite some other people to join in watching, feel free to do that, and let's jump in. So I'm sure that we all have these little quick memories of our childhood that will still stand out to us. And one of mine is an unfortunate one about my mom and a betta fish that we had growing up as a kid. Because we still talk about this and joke about this accident my mom did. It was a hot summer day like it's been lately, and she decided, because it was so hot, not only outside, but inside our house with no air conditioning and all that sweltering, that she would take a loose ice cube that had fallen out of her cup and she would give it to the betta fish to cool down the water in the betta fish's little cup. And as you might imagine, it didn't end up going well for that poor betta fish. But the reality is, we discover through things like that, I mean, she meant well. She was trying to cool off that poor fish, but sometimes good intentions, if it's the wrong thing, will still end up with the wrong results. And that's the reality, is the problem with doing wrong things is that they oftentimes end up with the wrong results. And we've been talking in this series, Peacemakers, about conflict. And conflict is one of those things that when you handle it wrong, it can lead to seriously disastrous wrong results. I mean, you got like divorce, the end of friendship, you can get fired, the rising anxiety and rising stress, or despair and depression, or you can lose money, or you can lose trust. Wars come out of conflicts not being handled right, estranged family members, or custody battles, and so many more things come out of us not handling conflict right and not handling it well. And it's not always obvious, though, is it, that what wrong things you're doing that lead to the wrong results. It's not always obvious to us that we may be doing the wrong thing. But Scripture gives us some really valuable insight. In Proverbs 14:12, God had Solomon, one of the wisest people of all history, write down and say, "There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way to death." Now, there's a way that seems right to us, but actually it ends in death. Now, I believe the Scripture is meant to be understood broadly, but it also fits perfectly when we're talking about conflict, doesn't it? Because it's hard to see the wrong way sometimes as we're handling conflict, because it seems right to us. I mean, I would imagine most of us, when we see somebody else handling something in a conflict moment really wrong, they're not thinking it's wrong. And vice versa, when we're in a moment, it seems right to us. It feels right to us. It feels right for you and I to think a certain way about a situation, or to act a certain way, or speak a certain way. We respond in conflict. You respond in moments that are tense a lot of times because it's the way that seems right. And there's a way of handling conflict for us that seems right to us. But sometimes, if it's just our way and it just seems right to us, just like the Scripture said, in the end, it leads to death. And I know that seems really intense and really strongly worded, but again, like we just said, there's a lot of disastrous results that come from us handling conflict wrong. But to remind you of some positive things here, Jesus said in Matthew 5:9, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. For they shall be called daughters of God," I think is fair to say too. "For they shall be called the people of God." This ends up being, as you can tell then, a distinguishing marker of sons of God, of daughters of God, of Christians. They are peacemakers. This is something we should be known for. This is something we're all about. Like, people know us as like, wow, those Christians are really peacemakers. And so far in this series that we've been in, we've really been focusing on laying the groundwork, laying the foundation. So we're talking mostly, at least we have been, about the principles of peacemaking. But today I'm really excited, because today we're finally jumping in to the process of peacemaking. So we're going to move into more of a process mood today. And so, to remind you real quick as we're getting started today, in week 1 of this series, I said, listen, there is too much, and you know this is true, there is too much of our lives that either involve conflict or involve a lot of potential for conflict for us to not get this right. We really need to get this right. Well, I just want to go ahead and now this week, week 4, add on to that as we move into today's subject matter, that it's not just that there's too much of conflict that ends up being, or there's too much of life that ends up involving conflict for us to not get this right. Well, I'll just say there are too many people who want to be considered sons of God, daughters of God, Christians, and at the same time, though, they have a process for dealing with conflict that is far from peacemaking. It's far from making peace. Instead of creating peace and caring for the welfare of others, they do as the sons and the daughters of the world do. They do like they would if they didn't even know Jesus. They yell, they fight for their own way, they bicker and complain and gossip, and they want to be Christians. And yet Jesus said, Christians and followers of me, sons of God, are peacemakers. That's how it works. When in conflict, we should look like Jesus. And there is a way in conflict that seems right to man, but its end is the way to death. And so I want us today to go, let's not go with the way that seems right to man. What is the way that Jesus invites us to handle conflict? What is the God solution for these tense moments, these tense and difficult people? Everything, as we've been talking about, everything drives towards peace, which in the Bible is the word shalom, which isn't just an absence of problems. We settled earlier in the series, that's not actually what peace is, what shalom is. Instead, it's fighting for what ends up being for a person's highest good. And so as we go into today, it's challenging that we're gonna have to fight for what does it look like for the highest good, and you're gonna see the challenge in just a second. But I just wanna let you know, it's not only challenging, but it's also rewarding, because Jesus said you'll be blessed, which also means happy, and you'll also be sons and daughters of God. So that's pretty good. Now here's the stark reality. Here's the one thing that I hope you get from today and today's message. And then we'll dig deeper into this as we go into it. But here's the one thing. I'll make more peace by following God's steps than by following what makes sense to me. I'll make more peace in my life and in the world around me by following God's steps than simply by following what makes sense to me. Because like Proverbs said, what makes sense to us doesn't always end up leading to life, and we want life. And so if you're a note taker, I want to let you know we're going to go through 4 phases of the godly process of making peace. And each one of those, they can stand alone, but I'm hoping that one of them will really stand out to you. But each of them are essential for us making peace. So let's dive into the first phase of godly peacemaking. It is admission of my predisposition. Admission of my predisposition. If it's true, like hang with me here for a second. If it's true that there's a way that seems right to us, right? Like Proverbs said, there's a way that seems right to man, but at the end it leads to death. If there's a way that seems right to me, it's good for me to see the way I tend to see conflict. Like it's good for me to take note of how I tend to see conflict, because generally there's a spectrum of 2 different conflict types. There's the turtle, and then there's the shark. And there's like a spectrum here, but like really there's the turtle or the shark. And you tend to be probably a turtle or a shark in some degrees, whether it's feedback that you're giving to others or feedback that you're getting from others, or if it's a situation maybe that you created that you're dealing with that's tense, or one that kind of came and found you that's tense. When these difficult moments come, when these challenges come, you and I, we tend to have a predisposition for how we're gonna handle them. Like when the heat is on, you either tend to shrink back or lunge forward. And I want to talk about this a little bit. Let's dig into this a little bit. Turtles, like I said, they end up moving away from the intensity. They want to escape it more so. They try to deny it maybe, run, or they simply, I don't care, no big deal, doesn't matter and all that. For them, it tends to be about keeping peace. Just keep not ruffling feathers, not making waves, keeping peace. And then they look in the Bible and they go, oh, I love the turn the other cheek Jesus. That's the Jesus that let's just kind of turn the other cheek. And sharks, on the other hand, sharks move toward intensity. Like they go in for the attack and all that, and they will sometimes fight. They'll even sabotage or do a little bit of mudslinging. They're the ones who like name call and kind of go in there and just really kind of be more aggressive. For them, it's about standing your ground. It's about fighting for what's fair. It's about making things right and all that. And so for them, it's almost kind of like they look at the Bible and they go, I like the Jesus that's like, hold my beer while I make this whip. Okay, so he obviously didn't have a beer, those of you who are concerned. I'm just saying that mentality of the tough, rough Jesus who makes a whip and clears the temple. But just to be clear, these sharks, if you are kind of thinking, well, I'm not really the macho, aggressive, in your face, not all sharks, not all that response type isn't always the big in your face. Sometimes it's more stealthy. It's more of the kind of sabotaging, and it's not the grin and bear it. Maybe it's not the aggressive, but it's not that I'm gonna take and bear it. I'm gonna get you back. But maybe more stealthy. But not only can these two different sides take different forms. Again, some of them are different aggressions or ways we're gonna do it, but they tend to be out of these two different sides. But it can also be in different environments. As you're looking at your life and how you deal with conflict, you may realize that honestly, sometimes in different environments, at home, I might be a shark, but at work, I might be a turtle. You know, I might be more laid back and easygoing, or I won't say anything in this particular environment with these friends, but with these people, I will go ahead and go all out. So I'm curious. I'm going to ask you, where do you fall on the spectrum? Like, what's your predisposition? Where do you lean? Maybe you're not hardcore one or the other, but where is it that you tend to lean and your response when it comes to conflict? Because we all have well-worn paths, knee-jerk reactions. When we handle challenges, we either kind of like get ready or run, like that fight or flight kind of thing. But it's important that we acknowledge this reality of how we tend to respond. This isn't just to kind of navel gaze and look at ourselves. The reason why this is important is because your predisposition to conflict will try to pull you away from making peace. Like, that's why this is so important, because your predisposition to your predisposition to handling conflict will try to pull you away from making peace. Because let's just deal with one first. You can't make peace when you behave so much like a turtle, where you're all about keeping the peace and silently suffering, or letting others silently suffer. Where the idea is that when you go to this extreme and you're a turtle, it's like solving the problem of a house fire by taking the batteries out of the smoke alarm. Well, you're not hearing it anymore, and it may have sort of silenced things, but obviously nothing's actually better that way. And Jesus didn't call us, just so we're clear, to keep peace. It doesn't say, blessed are the peacekeepers. He called us to make peace. So, blessed, like that reality of being happy and blessed, comes not when we're passively accepting because we're afraid to confront. Where we're like, I don't know if I want to say anything because I just don't know how they're going to take it, and I'm afraid of what they're going to think, and I just don't know. That's not when peace comes. Peace comes when we actually face the struggle that we're going into, that we've maybe come to us even, face the struggle the way that God wants, even if that facing it and going into it is a struggle itself. God is honored in that, and that's what God chooses to bless. So if you're afraid to ruffle feathers, or if you're afraid to speak up in tense moments or to approach tough subjects, I just want to challenge you. You have to learn to deny yourself the chance to go the way that feels right, because the way that feels right isn't always right. And also now, you can't make peace being a shark either. Because you fighting in the flesh and you letting your anger lead the decision making, you letting people have it. Well, I mean, James even writes in his book, he says, the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. You're getting ticked off and letting people have it, responding in anger, even if you want to try and look at it and go, oh, it's righteous anger, because you can call everything, if you want, a sin and, spiritualize your anger issue. But, I mean, let's be honest, you certainly can. And many people, who claim Christ do justify a ton of anger-fueled actions and statements that they make. They allow themselves to feel this justification in responding in anger. They totally deserved it, or I needed to teach them a lesson. They'll never learn unless I really maybe I didn't handle it best, but they needed to learn. It's like, no. Your anger is not a good teacher. I'm going to actually say that again because I want to make sure you get that. Your anger, you're going to teach them a lesson, is not a good teacher. So, for these people, if we tend to lose our cool, we tend to speak harshly, and people, maybe you don't think you're being harsh, but a lot of people around you have told you that you are. Or maybe these people who react strongly or fight ferociously and, again, can even sometimes justify it. Well, I'm not fighting for me, I'm fighting for them, but you're maybe a jerk while you're doing it. You're a shark. Like you need to learn just as much as the turtle needs to learn. You've got to deny yourself the chance to go in the way of handling conflict that seems right to you, that feels right to you. Because there's a way that seems right to man, but in the end it leads to death. The admission of my predisposition is the admission of the resistance that I have towards making peace. On either of these extremes, we fall, again, even sometimes going from one side, depending on the environment or the situation, to the other side. Admitting that disposition shows us, okay, I need to kind of be aware that that is where I'm going to be tempted to fight for what makes sense to me rather than fighting for what actually will make peace in the situation. So that's the first phase. The second phase now is the option of overlooking. Now, it was crazy for me to realize this. So I imagine for you, it might be crazy for you to realize this, but I have a big, big thing here. You can actually sometimes let some things go. Like you can actually sometimes just totally frozen moment, let it go. Now, legitimately overlooking. That's what I'm talking about here. Like legitimately, not like the kind of like, oh, I'm gonna let it go, but then I'm gonna passive aggressively keep it bringing it up or keep dealing with it or keep dealing with that person with that in mind. Or I'm gonna let it go, but I'm gonna vent about it to anyone that'll let me just tell them about how that, I'm letting it go, but you're venting about it. Or like I'm gonna let it go, but I'm gonna key their car in silent protest of how ignorant they are. That's not the overlooking I'm talking about. Like the overlooking that really just overlooks it. And it's not just possible, by the way, that we can do this. It's part of God's peacemaking process. I mean, let's look at Proverbs 19:11. I think this is so wild for us to realize. And again, I think it's so wild for some Christians to know that this is actually a biblical truth. But Proverbs 19:11 says, "Good sense makes one slow to anger, and it is his glory to overlook an offense." It is to your glory to overlook an offense, to your high honor, to your splendor, and to your wonder to just let it go. Like, by the way, this isn't backtracking on what we just talked about the two predispositions. This isn't me backtracking on that previous point, because I'm not talking about us choosing to overlook out of fear or out of a desire to just be a people pleaser where we just make people like us. It's not why we're overlooking. It's actually specifically said that it's out of wisdom that we're choosing to do this. Because wisdom realizes, and note takers, you might want to write this one down, because wisdom realizes that not everything needs addressed, and also that not everything needs ignored. So again, the two predispositions, not everything needs addressed, sharks, and not everything needs ignored, turtles. It's a good doctor knows when a sickness just needs intervention. It needs more pain, actually, surgery or whatever it might be, more pain in order for long-term benefits. We've got to get in there. We've got to make some changes. But also a good doctor knows when whatever is going on just needs to run its course. Let it go. It's going to just run its course and everything will be okay. So we can overlook an offense that we've kind of had come at us when we can see that, you know what, it's just better if we do that. It's more good is going to come than if we were to actually address it. It's probably something I can handle. It's okay, and more good could come if we just don't address it. And there's different variations of this. Proverbs 12:16 says, "A fool is quick-tempered, but a wise person stays calm even when insulted." So a wise person will go in a situation when they're maybe getting insulted even, like someone's coming after them, and they go, you know what? No one's better if I choose to engage and if I choose to react and to respond. No one's going to be better. Like a wise person, friend, and I hope you want to be, and I want to be a wise person, can look at a situation and not in pride, and we're not like, oh, I'm better than that person. I know there's no way they're going to be reasonable. But in wisdom, can kind of go realistically, they're not going to listen to me. We're not going to get anywhere. And it's not the end of the world. I'm just going to let it go. And this also works for when we're tempted to start something ourselves. Another proverb, since this is the book of wisdom that we're trying to dig into today, Proverbs 17:14 says, starting a quarrel is like opening a floodgate. So stop before a dispute even breaks out. Stop before it even starts. If I can take this offense, whatever it is, and I can release this, and they're not continuing to hurt me and hurt others, like realistically, I can stop this before it even starts, well then let your spouse go. Let your neighbor go. Like let your friend go. Let your classmate, whatever it is, go. Like let them off the hook. Let it go. Because you don't always have to bring up every single offense maybe that you're experiencing. You don't always have to bring it up to the person. And honestly, I think this is wisdom. It's more likely that people will take your concern more seriously, and your concerns and your issues more seriously when they happen less often. It makes sense to me that people are going to go, wow, he said that this bothered him, and I know that's a big deal because he doesn't just complain about everything, or she doesn't complain about everything. That must be a big deal. So, what would it look like for you to be more unoffendable? Like, what would it look like for you to really take this to heart and go, you know what? I'm going to, with wisdom, realize what things I can allow to just overlook. Like, how could you grow in applying God's wisdom of overlooking an offense? That's the question for you to think about with this one. But as we move into the third phase, the reality is that sometimes it's hard to stay silent. And the reality is it's hard because this pain, whatever is going on in the situation, this pain needs to be dealt with. And it needs to be dealt with in a way that is right, because there's a way that seems right to man. Remember, that's our kind of main verse here today. There's a way that seems right to man. And when it comes to this whole not overlooking and the pain is too hard, the way that seems right to man, let's just be honest, church, okay? Ready? Is to talk about it to anyone and everyone but the person that we really need to talk to, the person that has hurt us, the person that we have offense towards or has offense towards us, that we decide we want to talk about it, but too infrequently do we talk about it to the person who we really should be talking about it. So that leads us to our third element of God's process of making peace, and that is constructive conversations. Constructive conversations. The reality is you've got to talk about it with them. You do. I had some fun, as you may have been able to observe, with the titles of the messages in the series. I've had a lot of fun being snarky and all that kind of stuff. And this one today is called We Need to Talk. And so I just want to real quick do a PSA. While I'm telling you, you do need to talk to people, can we just, real quickly, can we just ban that phrase? Like, be a nice person. This isn't even being a Christian, kind of thing, being a good follower of Jesus. Just be a decent person. And don't tell people we need to talk, because it's way too unfair if you've ever been on the other side of it, because our brains just go like running, like we need to talk. Like if you're in a relationship, you're dating or something like that, we need to talk. Are we gonna break up? Do you hate me? What's going on? Even in your marriage, you can be like, what's going wrong? Like, do you hate me? All that kind of stuff. Or at work, you're going on a Friday afternoon, we need to talk. Are you firing me? Are you quitting? We need to talk is off limits. But anyway, even still, yeah, if you're in conflict and you've tried you've recognized your predisposition, you've tried to overlook the offense, it's not possible, then y'all need to talk. And this is biblical. Let me just show you a little bit here. Matthew 18:15 says, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault. Biblically, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. And if he listens to you, you've gained your brother. And then Proverbs 27 says, an open rebuke is better than hidden love. And wounds from a sincere friend are better than many kisses from an enemy. Like it's better to have a couple stings from someone who really cares about you than it is to have someone who can't stand you just, butter you up and all that. Galatians 6, last one here. Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness, going to them. That's what he's talking, going to them, restoring them, talking to them. Now, real quickly, clearly the Bible talks about this, but the Bible also, we saw, I think it was 2 weeks ago, it talked about remembering that God said, you deal with the plank in your eye first. Like you deal with the issues that you bring to the table first. So anyone who's overeager to deal with someone else, to deal with someone else's issues and brokenness and all that, I would say hasn't properly dealt with their own. If we are so ready to go and let someone else have it, the reality is we probably haven't properly let God's Spirit deal with our own brokenness and whatever we're contributing to the situation. But for those turtles, those people who go, I just want to just not stir anything up. I don't think I should ever have to say anything to them. And we're afraid of that. Biblically, these conversations have to happen. We just saw that. It's so clear that God has told us we have to have these kind of conversations. So I want to give us some real quick wisdom about how we go about these conversations. Get kind of bullet point here a little bit. I would say make sure it's at a wise time. Like, be considerate to the person and their schedule. Choose a time that allows you to have a real conversation, because if we're not wise, we might find that we're talking to them about something that's serious and they're not ready to have that kind of conversation. They have something else going on or whatever it might be, or maybe it makes us rush something that really shouldn't be rushed. So choose a wise time. Choose a wise style. And what I mean by this is attack mode doesn't usually beget peace mode. You know, like you go in kind of aggressive and on attack mode, it doesn't usually, if that's your style, it's not going to usually bring about peace. And then in a wise format also. Let me just tell you, face-to-face is best. Like, make it as personal as possible. Try and move towards, especially the more serious the matter, the more personal the conversation should be. When the moment's tense and there's like text conversation, whether it's email or text itself, have you ever noticed how we read a pessimistic kind of tone into it? We kind of naturally, a lot of us do at least, tend to presume the other person's speaking much more nasty than they really are. We just presume that it's way intense. And maybe they are being nasty, but if you're communicating with someone else and you want to make peace, it's best off to let the tone not be unknown. Go ahead and let them know where you're at by talking to them. Picking up the phone and using it as a phone, or setting up a coffee or setting up a time to go ahead and talk to them face to face. Because I think this means also, by the way, that we probably should try and move away from having debates online. Because debates online, we go back and forth, and again, it's tempting for me even, but we got to move those towards personal things, because a debate online is effectively like washing your car with a toothbrush. I mean, yeah, it gets the job done in some, but no one's impressed by that. Like, it takes you a lot of time, and yet no one's impressed. For me, what is impressive is someone who's willing to go ahead and take the time to say, you know what, let's actually sit down and let's talk about this. And if you don't want to do that, you probably shouldn't even engage in it in the first place. Okay. In fact, though, Galatians 6:1 said that we're restoring someone who's caught in transgression. And so I think that helps us to realize what this whole conversation should look like. Basically, that word caught kind of creates the picture of either like a fish or an animal that's caught in a net and it needs help out. So if you find yourself in a moment where you're kind of going, I need to address something with this person. Well, in humility and in love, we need to speak up. We need to go in there and try and untangle things a little bit. Again, humility, not presuming that we already know everything. We talked about that in that message, the common denominator. We realized I might not see everything perfectly, but help me to see it better, but you're caught in something. And to do this right, it does take, just so you know, time and energy. Because to do this right, you're listening and then you're speaking. And then you're listening some more. And then you're saying some more things and it's listening some more and speaking some more. I actually want to give you a piece of advice that I got from a book that I read a couple weeks ago, and it's one of my favorite books that I've read this year, if not in the last couple years. Thanks for the feedback. And one of the things it talked about here that I think is helpful for us as we talk about these conversations, let's pretend that the conversation is you initiating it with someone else, and you're addressing an issue where you feel like they've been disrespecting you. So you tell them, hey, I really feel like there's some things you've been doing or saying that have made me feel disrespected. And then they respond, because again, you know you've been on the other side of this too. They go, well, okay, it's really cool that you feel disrespected by this, or that you don't think I care about you, because all you ever do is complain and critique me, and I never can do anything right for you. It feels like you're always looking to critique me. Now, the problem is we approach these usually, and this is what they call switch tracking. Well, we approach it as if we're dealing with one issue now. Like we're talking about the same thing, but what has just happened, and it's important for us to notice this, is we're now talking about two things. I wanted to talk about disrespect, and I felt like I was being disrespected, and I want to deal with those either actions or words that made me feel that way. But then when the feedback comes back, when the person responds and is talking about feeling unappreciated, well, we now have two topics we need to talk about. And it's really important. It's so valuable. That's why I wanted to give, again, this little bit of wisdom, I think, from this book to us to process today. If we're going to have some good peacemaking, it's good for us in these moments to go, hey, I appreciate you sharing that with me. And that's something I wasn't aware, maybe, that I was doing. And I think it'd be really good for us to talk about. Would it be okay if we dealt with my concern about feeling disrespected as long as we're definitely going to deal with your concern about feeling unappreciated? Or would you rather we talk about your feeling unappreciated first, and then maybe we can approach my concern about feeling disrespected? Because I think both do matter. Now again, that might feel more robotic than you're used to. And it is a little bit more, I think, intentional, maybe, than we're used to having conflict. But at the same time, how many times do we screw this up? Because we just get so emotional, so fired up, and we're like, I don't care about you feeling unappreciated. I feel disrespected. Instead, if we can appreciate and love people, we can take and use both conversations to bring about something good. We look at it basically and we're going, what can we each do about making this situation more peaceful? And none of this, by the way, as you can observe, none of this conversation, this constructive conversation involves this whole idea, which is the whole, I don't want to make this a big deal, so I'm just going to say my piece and then I'm going to just leave and walk away. That's not, by the way, a biblical way of handling it. Because think about it. The idea of I don't want to make a big deal of this, so I'm just going to say my piece and then walk away. Well, would you feel more honored, more respected, more loved, and all that because somebody did that to you? Because they looked at you and said, I'm just going to give you my thoughts, my feelings, my perspective on this situation so you can have it and do with it what you want, but I'm not going to take the time to then listen and ask and understand where you're at. Like, no, you wouldn't feel more respected and loved, and we're supposed to do to others as we want them to do to us. So we need to have real constructive conversations where all of the important faults, whether it's theirs or ours, can be lovingly discussed and graciously dealt with. And the reality is, I've been on so many sides of this, even lately because of COVID and all the heightened stress and anxiety and all that. I have had my fair share of being on the receiving and on the giving side of a lot of challenging conversations. And there's an uptick lately with all of this stuff going on, honestly, for me asking to get coffee with people, for me trying to have face-to-face conversations, both because I'm on the receiving end or I'm on the giving end of some hurt and some conflict needs to be resolved. We need to make some peace. And I'll be honest, I've also had times where I've asked for conversation and been refused. So you need to know, unfortunately, that'll sometimes sadly happen. We should never be the ones, I think, refusing to at least talk about things. And I've also had times where people never even invited the discussion. They just ditched me. They just left. I never knew there was hurt. I never knew there was offense. And so for that reason, I kind of want to just give a plea out there. And I want you to know this isn't me being passive aggressive, because my assumption is any of the people watching aren't the people I'm talking about. But please leave well. Whenever you leave a season, if you leave a church, for instance, or if you leave a job, or you leave a relationship, don't just, I guess relationships are probably the hardest out of them, but churches and jobs, leave well. It's so important that in these moments we really do have the important conversations that we need to have. Like, listen, a church that you've been invested in, that you've called your church, you should care about to want it to be better. And if there's been offense, if there's been hurt, if there's been anything that they've done or should have done or whatever it might be that you feel like is reason to leave, you are not better, and that church is not better by you just walking away. Now, granted, again, I'm not giving you a license here to be a jerk and go in and tell them how they're all messed up, because at the end of the day, it might just be a perspective thing where you think you know something and they think they know something, and it's just different, and that is that. But unfortunately, we've literally had moments in the history of our church where people have left, and if we were ever to have been able to have the conversation, because it's usually, I can think of a couple where it's been a turn and burn. They just kind of throw an email my way of why they're leaving, and I find out as I'm reading it that there's a misunderstanding that truly is a misunderstanding. Like, it didn't need to be like this. It didn't need to be cutting ties by. So have the hard conversations. Be humble and realize, and again, I've been on both sides of this. I've had times where I just want to cut people off. It's so good for us to listen and really understand. What would this world be like if people left churches in healthy ways, when God's calling them and they do it in a healthy way to restore and to really care for the church they're leaving as well as the one they're going into? And church connection is so critical, a healthy church connection, because of conflict. Because check this out. Biblically, sometimes one-on-one conversations, Matthew 18, we just read about it, you and that person, you get with them alone and you talk with them. But the Bible also realizes sometimes that's just not going to be enough. When it comes to constructive conversations, sometimes you go one-on-one and you don't resolve the conflict. In fact, it's not an issue you can overlook anymore. The one-on-one conversation isn't working. Matthew 18, Jesus himself gives us, in the verses that follow the one we just read, actually, we're going to read that one again. Matthew 18:15. If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. And if he listens to you, you've gained your brother. Awesome. But if he doesn't listen to you, take one or two others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses, he says. Now, if he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and as a tax collector. This is what we call, by the way, these end verses, we refer to this as church discipline. It's this progressive way of trying to deal with a person, trying to deal with conflict in a way that's constructive. If it doesn't work out, that the two of you can't figure it out, well, then you got to bring some other people, some other loving and unbiased people who can care enough for peace, enough for God's glory, that they go, you know what? You brought it to us that he had hurt you, or that she had hurt you, but actually I think you're the one who has some issues that need to be worked out here. We should be okay with that happening, because if it's our fault, let us get better. Let us be more like Jesus. But at the end of the day, church discipline, the end goal, is clearly the same thing that Paul talked about in Galatians 6. You see it in these verses, restoring him, restoring her. And so that leads us to our last and fourth and final phase of God's peacemaking process. And that is simply this: make it right. Make it right. See, making it right can mean a variety of different things, because we have a variety of different conflict situations. So for instance, it might just be that there's someone that you have this kind of discord and you just don't necessarily get along well with. Well, when you talk with them and you're dealing with this, you might just find there's no actual sin here. It's just that we view things and we do things differently. And so what you then do, this way of making it right and reconciling it, is you have then in that moment the opportunity to give grace to that person, to go, okay, you know what? I guess we just do things differently, but I'm going to truly and genuinely give you the room to be a unique individual who does and sees and acts differently than I do. So that's just that. And you give that grace to that person. And then it might be that you actually, in a moment where there's some tension and conflict, you look into it and you find that there is sin, whether it's your sin or their sin. There is something there that's broken that actually God does not like. And in that moment, the goal would be that they repent, that you repent, you turn from it, and you move ahead in grace. Like the end goal isn't this for you or for them, this crushing of the person where it's like, oh yeah, you feel shame now, you feel awful now. Good, that's what you're supposed to feel. No, it's restoration. It's rebuilding the relationship with that person and then that relationship with God as well. Or maybe it's just a difference of opinions. And in that case then, if it's just a difference of opinions, you work towards understanding, towards caring and lovingly finding a way to move forward. And if it's at a personal or even a large scale, as we're seeing all around us right now in our nation, what we need to do, if there's systems that are broken, we need to not just go and let's just care for each other. Let's just say we love each other. We also, restoration, this making it right, means we're working on the systems to make it right and to make them make peace wherever we can. See, that idea of reconciliation is all about whatever makes things right. Shalom, person's best good. Where's God going to be most glorified in this situation? And so the question for us is, what's that look like here in the situation I'm in, the conflict I'm in, the moment I'm in that is not pretty and not fun? How do we restore relationship here? Like, what is it? And you got to have eyes of faith, friend. You got to have these eyes to go, don't limit God for what he can do. God is a miracle working God. We have seen him do it. So what does it look like for him to restore relationship? What does it look like for us to do the work so that we're not repeating sins and hurts that we've experienced here? What does it look like for us here to grow to be more like Jesus? That's what peacemaking is all about, is restoring and reconciling and making things right. See, God cares so much about reconciliation and reconciling that he puts worship services on pause. He puts worship services on pause. We see this in Matthew 5:21, where Jesus himself says, "You have heard that it was said to those of old, 'You shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment.' But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says, 'You fool,' will be liable to the hell of fire. So if you are offering your gift at the altar," if you're in a worship service, you're in a worship moment, you're offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First, be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. It's that idea that we quit rushing ahead. Quit doing all the spiritual things and quit rushing ahead with your plan and go do some peacemaking. And that's something that my homestyle church group, our homestyle church group that we have discussed recently in this whole peacemaking series, is we've had some really great discussions, as we do in homestyle church groups. We were just talking about this idea that perhaps we need to learn the art of just slowing down. Like that maybe is really what it means to make peace. It just requires us to slow down to really reflect, on how you view you people. Slow down and really consider, what is a win in this fight? Is it to glorify God, to serve others, and to imitate Christ? Or is it something else? Slowing down to really evaluate how you, the common denominator of all of your conflicts, might be contributing to those conflicts. Slowing down to check your heart so you can speak truly with all due respect, all due honor and love. Slowing down, as we see today, so that you can productively process things with people so that you can reconcile. Because we decided that it does take more time. In our homestyle church group, we decided it takes more time to do it this way on the front end. But oh my goodness, on the long-term perspective, it saves so much time, energy, and heartbreak for us to do this God's way. So what does it look like for you to choose a way that's right? Like the way when it comes to conflicts, that's really the right way. Do you need to recognize some of your predispositions and admit them that, I tend to be so this way or this way, and you find that they're robbing you. Either you're so aggressive, you're not making peace because you're just constantly dealing in anger, and you got to start calling yourself out on that and let God work on that. Or maybe it's because you're so afraid that you never speak up, that you're never making peace and you're never making things better. Do you maybe need to admit that you haven't been willing to overlook some offenses? And that's something that God needs to work on you in. And maybe now's a good time for you to start doing that. Maybe you need to come out of today and you need to have some constructive conversations. Like there are some people that you need to try and get together with and do everything in your power to sit down and graciously listen to and talk to and go, hey, there are some things that we need to work on here. It would be so much better if you would do that in the world of making peace. Because also, are there some people maybe, as you're applying today's message, that you need to reconcile with? Does God need to give you the faith to believe that there are some relationships that he is looking to actually make healthy, that you've maybe even decided are totally too far gone? But at the end of the day, I want to remind you, I will make more peace by following God's steps than by following what makes sense to me. So, the way of the world around us, what the sons and daughters of the world, if you will, are doing when it comes to handling conflict isn't working. What Jesus called us to, it does. It's not 100% guarantee that it'll always work perfectly and always work great, but I can tell you this, it does work better. God's way is better. And that whole idea of reconciling, listen, I end with this. If God can be perfect, look from heaven on our brokenness and love us so much that he's willing to do whatever he can to reconcile that relationship, to make us right, that he would send Jesus to die on a cross, then you and I, followers of Jesus, should be about the same blood, sweat, and tears to go, you know what? The fight to make peace is worth it because Jesus did it for me. I'm going to do it for the world around me. We get to do this by the grace and the power of Jesus in us. So let's go make some peace. And I'll see you here next week as we do a series and a conclusion to the series called How to Cut Them Off. And I can't tell you any more than that, but you're going to want to make sure that you're here next week for that.